My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood what a healthy relationship looked like. I believed that checking in meant you cared, that asking questions meant you were invested, that consistency meant commitment. I believed that if you loved someone, you didn't make them feel small for wanting reassurance. I didn't know how fast those beliefs could be twisted against me until the man I trusted looked me straight in the face and said, "Your concern feels like control." That sentence didn't just hurt, it rewrote everything I thought I knew. If you've ever been told you were too much for simply caring, stay with me. And if you've lived through something like this, I want you to tell me in the comments, because this story didn't unfold the way I expected it to. I met Lucas Bennett 3 years ago at a casual backyard barbecue outside Denver. One of those late summer evenings where the music is low, the food is overcooked, and you're not expecting anything meaningful to happen. We ended up sitting on the edge of the deck, talking about work, family, the strange pressure of being in your 30s, and feeling like life is supposed to look a certain way that now. He felt grounded, steady, the kind of man who listened without interrupting and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. I remember thinking how rare that felt. Within a year, we were sharing a place. Within 2, we were talking about buying a house. Not in dramatic, romantic declarations, but in spreadsheets, Zillow links, and Sunday morning coffee conversations, the kind of future that grows quietly and feels safe. Lucas worked as a project manager for a construction consulting firm. His job required frequent travel, job sites, inspections, client meetings across state lines. I respected that. I admired his ambition. I never questioned his schedule because he had never given me a reason to. At least, not at first. For most of our relationship, my questions were ordinary. Did you get home safe? What time do you think you'll be back? How did the meeting go? They were the same questions I'd always asked, the same ones he'd always answered without hesitation. Until one day, they became a problem. It didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, just a slow shift I couldn't name. He started coming home later, answering shorter, looking distracted in ways that felt unfamiliar. When I asked about his day, he'd sigh, like I was pulling him away from something more important. I told myself I was imagining it, that work was stressful, that I was overthinking. Then one night, after he returned from a delayed work trip, I asked, casually, gently, if everything was okay. He dropped his bag by the door and snapped, "Why do you always need to know where I am?" The words landed heavier than his tone, sharp, defensive, unrecognizable. I stared at him, genuinely confused. "I was just asking about your trip." "No, you weren't," he said. "You're always checking up on me. It's suffocating." Suffocating. I remember sitting down on the couch because my legs suddenly didn't trust me. When have I ever tried to control you? I don't stop you from traveling. I don't question your decisions. I ask because I care. That's not caring, that's tracking. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. Because suddenly the same care he once welcomed had become evidence against me, and I didn't understand how I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. That night, lying beside him in silence, I made a quiet decision, one that would change everything. If my care was the problem, I would stop offering it, and I would find out what happened when I finally gave him the space he said he needed. Before everything began to unravel, our life together was ordinary in the best way. Lucas and I didn't have a dramatic love story. There were no sweeping gestures or sudden declarations. What we had felt steadier than that, built in small, dependable moments that stacked up over time. Grocery runs on Sunday mornings, shared playlists for long drives, inside jokes that only made sense to us. I believed that was what real partnership looked like. We moved into our apartment in Denver after a year and a half together. It wasn't fancy, just enough space, light coming in through the living room windows in the late afternoon, a neighborhood quiet enough to feel settled. We split chores without keeping score. We argued sometimes, sure, but we talked things through. Or at least, I thought we did. Lucas's job demanded flexibility, and I tried to meet him there. When he had early site visits or late client calls, I adjusted. When trips popped up last minute, I reorganized my schedule. I told myself that loving someone meant trusting them, and I did. I remember defending him to friends when they asked if his travel bothered me. He works hard, I'd say. It's temporary, and he always tells me where he's going. I said that with confidence, with pride. Looking back, what hurts most isn't that I trusted him, it's that I trusted him thoughtfully. I didn't ignore red flags because I was desperate or naive. I trusted because, for a long time, there weren't any. The shift came quietly, not as an argument, but as distance. He'd come home exhausted and retreat into his phone. Conversations shortened. Laughter faded. When I reached for him in bed, he'd turn away, already half asleep. I told myself this was adulthood, stress, life getting heavier. So I leaned in instead of pulling back. I checked on him more, asked if he was okay, asked how I could help. I believed that showing up was the right response when someone you love seemed overwhelmed. But something about that unsettled him. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, I asked what time he thought he'd be back the following evening. He paused, looked at me, and exhaled sharply, like I'd just accused him of something. "Why do you always need details?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "I just like knowing what to expect," I said. "It helps me plan." He shrugged it off, but the air between us changed. I started to feel like every question needed justification, like curiosity had become something suspicious. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering if my tone sounded wrong, if my timing was off, if I was missing something obvious. I didn't want to be that partner, the one who nags, who hovers, who doesn't trust. So I tried harder to be easygoing, quieter, less visible. Still, the tension lingered. What I didn't realize then was how quickly love can turn into self-doubt when you're made to feel like your care is a flaw. I started editing myself mid-sentence, holding back questions that felt natural, smiling through confusion because I didn't want another sigh, another look that said I was asking for too much. I told myself relationships go through phases, that this was one of them. But in the quiet moments, late at night, staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me, I felt a sadness I couldn't name, a sense that I was slowly being pushed to the edges of my own relationship. And still, I stayed gentle, because I believed that if I loved him enough, patiently enough, this distance would pass, that whatever was weighing on him would eventually lift. I didn't know yet that the person being worn down wasn't him, it was me. The moment I started noticing the pattern, it was already too late to ignore it. Every question I asked seemed to irritate Lucas, not because of what I was saying, but because I was the one saying it. The same curiosity he once welcomed now triggered defensiveness, and the shift was subtle enough to make me doubt my own memory. When he came home late, I didn't accuse. I asked if traffic was bad. When he traveled, I didn't interrogate. I asked if he landed safely. When he took calls in the other room, I didn't listen. I minded my own business. Still, his patience with me wore thinner by the day. One evening, as I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, he glanced at it and said almost casually, "You don't need to track my location, you know." I laughed, confused. "I don't." "Well, it feels like you do," he replied. That was when something inside me hardened, not into anger yet, but into clarity. Because feelings don't come out of nowhere. Accusations don't either. They're built, rehearsed, fed by something else. I started noticing how often he reframed my intentions. If I asked how his day went, I was probing. If I checked in, I was hovering. If I expressed concern, I was assuming the worst. No matter how gently I spoke, the result was the same. My care was recast as control. The unfairness of it began to sink in slowly, like a bruise you don't feel until the next morning. I had spent years being thoughtful, supportive, flexible, and suddenly I was being painted as the problem. What hurt the most wasn't the accusation, it was how confidently he delivered it, like he'd already decided who I was and I was just catching up. One night after he returned from another extended workday, I asked a single, ordinary question. Do you want dinner now or should I wait? He snapped. Why does everything need a discussion? I stared at him. I was just asking what you wanted. Exactly, he said. You're always asking, always checking. It's exhausting. Exhausting. That word stayed with me, because loving someone shouldn't feel like a burden. And if it did, shouldn't we talk about why? Instead, I was handed blame. The more he pulled away, the more he accused me of pushing. The more distant he became, the more he claimed I was suffocating him. It was a perfect reversal, one that left me defending myself against crimes I didn't commit. And somewhere along the way, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't confused. He was redirecting. Every time I asked a question that might bring us closer, he shut it down. Every time I tried to bridge the gap, he widened it and then blamed me for the distance. I started replaying conversations, trying to find the moment where I crossed the line, where care became control, where love became something ugly, but I couldn't find it. Friends noticed the change before I fully did. You seem tense, one of them said over lunch. Are you okay? Another asked. I shrugged it off, just a phase. But deep down, resentment was growing, slow, heavy, justified, because I was being punished for wanting clarity, for wanting honesty, for wanting to feel secure in my own relationship. I remember standing in the bathroom one morning, staring at my reflection and thinking, when did I become someone who apologizes for basic questions? That was the moment anger finally surfaced. Not loud, not explosive, but sharp and focused. Anger at being minimized, anger at being misunderstood on purpose, anger at realizing that no matter how carefully I spoke, he was determined to misunderstand me. The truth was, this wasn't about space, it was about power. And the more I stepped back, the more he seemed to need me to chase, just enough to prove he still had control. What I didn't know yet was how far he'd go to protect that control, or how badly he'd unravel once it slipped from his grasp. But by then, the damage was already done, because once you see the injustice clearly, you can't unsee it, and once anger replaces confusion, something inside you starts preparing, not for a fight, but for an exit. Anger didn't explode the way I expected it to. Instead, it drained me. After weeks of defending my intentions, of explaining the same care in different words, I grew tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Not physically, emotionally. I felt like I was constantly bracing myself, waiting for the next moment where something harmless would be turned against me. So when Lucas finally said, "I just need you to back off," I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't push. I agreed. That should have been a relief. It felt like surrender. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing slow. My chest felt hollow, like something important had quietly left without saying goodbye. I told myself that giving him space was the mature thing to do, that if I pulled back enough, things would stabilize. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't creating distance. I was erasing myself. The next morning, I didn't text him when he left for work. No, drive safe, no, good luck today. When he came home that evening, I asked nothing. I answered politely, briefly. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He waited, like he expected more. It didn't come. At first, the silence felt awkward, like wearing someone else's clothes. But after a few days, it became familiar, heavy, dull, strangely consuming. I stopped sharing thoughts before they reached my mouth. I stopped reacting when he was late. I stopped noticing. Or at least I pretended to. Inside, I was unraveling. I went through my days on autopilot. Work blurred together. Food tasted flat. I slept lightly, waking up with a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. I found myself apologizing to people at work for things that weren't my fault, second-guessing emails, rewriting sentences over and over, afraid of being misunderstood. I was shrinking. The apartment felt colder, even when the heat was on. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing space. When he took calls in the other room, I didn't look up. When he left early or came home late, I didn't ask. I told myself this was what he wanted. I told myself this was what love looked like when it was being tested. But late at night, alone with my thoughts, a darker realization crept in. I missed myself. I missed the version of me who asked questions without fear, who laughed without checking the room, who didn't feel like affection needed permission. I missed the safety I thought we had, the sense that I could be fully present without being punished for it. Instead, I was walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid that one wrong word would confirm the story he'd already decided to believe. One evening, as I stood in the shower, I caught myself crying silently, not because of something he'd said that day, but because I felt invisible, like my absence had become easier than my presence. That was the lowest point. Not rage, not heartbreak, numbness. It's terrifying how quietly despair can settle in. It doesn't announce itself. It just convinces you that this is normal now, that this is what relationships become if you're not careful. I started wondering if I was the problem after all, if I expected too much, if wanting reassurance made me needy, if asking to feel connected was unreasonable. Those thoughts scared me more than any argument ever had, because somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting my own instincts, and once you lose that, you're already lost. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. I didn't even know exactly what was broken anymore. All I knew was that I felt smaller every day, and no one was stopping it, not even me. By the end of that week, I was exhausted, hollow, detached from my own emotions. I had reached the point where even leaving felt impossible because I couldn't tell whether I was running from him or from myself. But sometimes rock bottom doesn't look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like silence so deep you can hear yourself disappearing. And that was where I was, when something inside me finally went still. Not because I had given up, but because, without realizing it, I was about to change direction entirely. The shift didn't come with clarity or confidence. It came with stillness. One morning, I woke up before my alarm. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt threatening, just empty. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to my own breathing, and realized something had changed. I wasn't anxious. For weeks, my chest had felt tight the moment I opened my eyes, like I needed to brace myself for the day. That morning, it didn't. There was no rush of worry, no replaying conversations in my head, just calm. That scared me at first, because calm felt unfamiliar, and unfamiliar, after everything, felt dangerous. Lucas was already gone when I got up. I didn't check the time, I didn't wonder where he was. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong, unapologetic, and stood by the window, watching the city wake up. Cars moved, people walked their dogs. Life continued without waiting for me to catch up. That was when the thought surfaced, fully formed. What if I didn't chase this anymore? Not out of spite, not to prove a point, just what if I stopped trying to hold together something that clearly didn't want to be held? Later that day, I got a message from my best friend, Naomi. She was turning 35 and planning a small weekend gathering in Austin. Nothing fancy, just friends, sunshine, and space. Normally, I would have checked Lucas's schedule first, talked it through, made sure it didn't interfere with anything important. Instead, I booked the flight. I didn't announce it, I didn't explain. I packed a small bag on Friday afternoon and left a note on the counter that said, "I'm visiting Naomi, back Sunday." No apologies, no details. As the plane lifted off, something inside me loosened. I wasn't running away, I was stepping out of a room that had been closing in on me. Austin felt lighter, louder, alive.
Naomi didn't ask questions when she saw my face. She hugged me and handed me a drink. That was enough. For the first time in months, I laughed without thinking about how it sounded. I slept through the night. I checked my phone only when I wanted to, not because I felt obligated to. Lucas called Saturday morning. I watched the phone vibrate on the table and let it stop. Then he texted, "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" I didn't respond. By afternoon, the messages shifted tone, confusion creeping in. By evening, they were edged with irritation. I read them without reacting, noticing something strange. I wasn't upset. I wasn't angry. I was clear. On Sunday morning, sitting on Naomi's balcony with coffee in my hands, I finally replied, "You said you needed space. I'm giving it to you." The phone rang immediately. I declined the call. For months, I'd been the one waiting, wondering, adjusting, explaining myself. Now, for the first time, I wasn't performing emotional labor for someone who had already checked out. When I returned Sunday night, Lucas was sitting on the couch, rigid, jaw tight. "You can't just disappear," he said. I met his eyes, calm in a way that seemed to unsettle him. "I didn't disappear, I stopped checking in." "That's not the same," he snapped. "Isn't it?" I asked. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. This had never been about space. It was about control. He wanted freedom without accountability, distance on his terms, a partner who stayed emotionally available while he pulled away. The moment I stopped chasing, the dynamic collapsed. I wasn't cold because I wanted revenge. I was cold because I was awake. For the first time, I trusted my instincts again. I trusted the quiet voice that told me this wasn't love, it was erosion, and I didn't need to explain that to anyone, not even him.
The calm didn't break when the truth came out. That surprised me. Lucas paced the living room like the walls were closing in on him. He kept opening his mouth, closing it again, like he was searching for the right version of himself to present, the one who still deserved sympathy. "You were trying to teach me a lesson," he finally said. "That's what that trip was. Manipulative, immature." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. "No," I said evenly. "This wasn't about you. It was about me not disappearing anymore." He stopped pacing. "You can't just shut me out and expect me to be okay with it." I met his eyes. "You shut me out for months." Silence stretched between us, the same silence he'd used as a weapon, only now it didn't protect him, it exposed him. He rubbed his face, exhaled sharply. "You're making this into something it's not." "Then tell me what it is," I said. He looked away, toward the kitchen, like the countertops might offer an escape. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. "There's someone at work." The room didn't spin. I didn't gasp. I just felt still. "Someone?" I repeated. He swallowed. "Her name is Emily Carter. She's on one of the regional teams." The name landed heavy, not because it was new, but because it wasn't. I'd heard it before, months back. A quick mention, a subtle tension, the kind of detail you file away without knowing why. "Let me guess," I said. "This started around the time you began pulling away." He nodded. "What kind of someone? Because you've been very careful with your words lately." He hesitated. "It wasn't physical." That answer told me everything. "But it wasn't innocent either," I said. He didn't deny it. The relief I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was something sharper, something cleaner. "So while you were calling me controlling, you were emotionally invested in someone else?" "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "It's exactly fair," I replied. "You rewrote me into the villain so you didn't have to face what you were doing." His shoulders sagged. I felt guilty. "And blaming me made it easier," I said. He nodded again. We talked for hours, not to fix anything, but to document the end.
He admitted the late-night messages, the extended work trips, the way he'd grown defensive whenever I asked questions, because questions threatened to expose him. You wanted freedom without consequences, space without honesty. He didn't argue. At one point, I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Do you have feelings for her? He stared at the floor. I don't know. That was all I needed, because confusion is not an answer someone in a committed relationship should have. By the time midnight came, the dynamic had shifted completely. There were no raised voices, no tears, just clarity. He packed a bag, slowly, deliberately, and said he'd stay with his sister. At the door, he hesitated. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at him, the man I'd adjusted myself for, the man who'd made me question my instincts, and replied calmly, "But you did." The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and for the first time in months, the apartment felt still in a way that wasn't suffocating. It felt earned. In the days that followed, word reached me through mutual friends. Lucas and Emily tried dating openly. Turns out, secrecy had been doing most of the heavy lifting. Without it, the connection lost its shine. I wasn't surprised. Because what he wanted wasn't her. It was the version of himself who didn't have to be accountable. And the moment I stopped playing the role he needed, quiet, patient, waiting, everything fell apart. That was the satisfaction. Not watching him suffer, but watching the truth stand on its own without me having to scream for it to be heard. The first morning without Lucas felt unfamiliar, but not lonely. The apartment didn't buzz with tension anymore. There were no half-finished conversations hanging in the air, no careful silences to navigate. I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, and stood by the window as sunlight spilled across the floor. The city moved on without asking anything of me, and for once, that felt comforting. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I let it exist. In the days that followed, I noticed how much energy I'd been spending just trying to stay emotionally balanced. Without that weight, everything felt lighter. I focused at work in a way I hadn't been able to for months. I went to the gym. I called friends I'd been meaning to check in on but hadn't had the capacity for. When people asked how I was doing, I surprised myself with the answer. I'm clearer, I said, and I meant it. Lucas reached out once, then again. Nothing dramatic, no long apologies, just careful messages, restrained, like he was afraid the wrong word might permanently close a door. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood something important. I didn't owe him closure. We met once more, briefly, at a coffee shop to finalize logistics. Lease details, furniture, the practical remnants of a life that no longer fit. He looked tired, thinner somehow. Guilt has a way of doing that. He admitted that he had feelings for Emily, but didn't know where they would lead. I listened calmly, because by then I already knew where I was going. 3 months passed. I received a promotion, the kind that doesn't just validate your performance, but your instincts. I started dating again, slowly, intentionally. And when I met someone who answered my questions without defensiveness, who didn't flinch at care, it felt easy. Not dramatic, not intense, just steady. Through mutual friends, I heard that Lucas and Emily didn't last long. Once secrecy was gone, so was the spark. He tried reaching out again. I let the message sit unanswered. I wasn't interested in being anyone's fallback plan. One evening, scrolling through old photos, I stopped on pictures from that weekend in Austin. Naomi laughing beside me, sunlight catching the rim of a glass, a version of myself that looked unburdened. That's when it finally clicked. The trip wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about teaching him a lesson. It was about reclaiming myself. When I stopped chasing, stopped proving I was reasonable, stopped shrinking my care into something palatable, he panicked. Not because he missed me, but because he lost control of the narrative. He wanted freedom without accountability, honesty without consequences, a partner who would wait quietly while he explored other options. The moment I stepped out of that role, everything collapsed. Looking back, I don't regret the years we spent together. They taught me what I need and what I will never tolerate again. Care isn't control. Space isn't silence, and love should never make you feel guilty for wanting clarity. The apartment feels different now, not empty, intentional. And every time I think about that weekend, I don't think about him anymore. I think about the moment I chose myself and didn't look back.